Everyone, welcome to Pit Stops at Podium, the Rev Partners podcast. We talk to execs who have competed and won, taking companies from high growth to high scale. My name is Brendan Tollison. I am the CEO and co-founder of Rev Partners, and I'm delighted to have with me today David Meerman Scott for this episode of Pit Stops to Podium. Welcome, Dave.
Hey, Brendan, great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, Dave. Well, I'm excited about this episode in light of your experience. But this may be a great opportunity for our audience to understand who is David. So do you mind sharing a little bit about your background, how you got to be here today?
Absolutely. So I started out after school on a bond trading desk on Wall Street, hated it, was terrible at it. But what I loved was the information that the bond traders were using. So I worked for 15 years in the corporate world for companies like Dow Jones and Thomson Reuters. And then I left 20 years ago to go out on my own. I've written 13 books.
Wow.
3 of them are international bestsellers. I'm probably best known for a book called The New Rules of Marketing and PR. I co-wrote Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead with HubSpot co-founder and executive chairman Brian Halligan. We became fast friends back in 2007, and I've been on the HubSpot advisory board since the very beginning in 2007, and I'm still on the HubSpot advisory board. So we have that connection that we're both very deep into the world of HubSpot.
And Grateful Dead, based off of
and are you Grateful
background.
Dead too? Nice.
I appreciate it. I don't know if I would say I'm a Deadhead, but it's
well, have you been to 87 Grateful Dead concerts like I have?
Holy moly. No, I have not. That's impressive.
Okay. So I beat you on that one, although Halligan's has been to more Grateful Dead concerts than I have. Brian owns Jerry Garcia's Wolf guitar. I own Bob Weir's No Fun guitar. So our Grateful Dead fandom runs pretty darn deep.
I bet. Well, that might kind of bleed into the next section of this podcast. And so we'll get to the big idea in just a second, but we do have a tradition here at Pit Stops at Podium, and that's to get to know our guests outside of work. So David, what are 3 fun facts outside of going to 87 Grateful Dead concerts that our audience should know about?
So the book that I wrote most recently is a book called Fanocracy. I wrote it with my daughter, Reiko, and it was super cool to write a book with one's daughter. And at the time we were writing, she was in medical school. She's now has graduated from medical school and is doing her emergency department residency at Boston Medical Center. So that's super cool. You see over my shoulders several of my passions. We talked about the Grateful Dead. I love surfing. I surf as much as I can. I'm not very good at it, but it is hugely important in my life. This past week, I was actually out, I think, 4 different days. And 2 of the days, lifeguards called us in because of sharks. And it's the first time in 30 years of surfing that I've been pulled in because of shark sightings. So there you go. I don't know what that's portraying for the future. And I'm a huge, passionate fan of the Apollo lunar program. And there's a Saturn V rocket model over my shoulder. I actually have one of the world's best collections of artifacts of items that flew to the surface of the moon, were either used by the astronauts or in some way in the spacecraft. So I geek out pretty deep about the things that I get into: surfing, music, live music, and Apollo being 3 of them.
Well, at the time of this recording, it was just Shark Week, so I think your timing with surfing and sharks is.
I don't know what's with that. Shark Week is the only time that I've ever been yanked in by the lifeguards because of shark sightings. So there you go. I guess they got the week right.
Yeah, I think you're the only guest I've had so far that has like props for every single fun fact. So to your point, there are things you're very passionate about.
I'm talking to you from my home studio, and I very much like to to have stuff around me, and passion is super important.
Well, I think that's a good segue to the big idea. And you talked about how you were an advisor at HubSpot, and one of the fun facts you talked about was a book you recently wrote with your daughter. And so let's actually talk about that book, because there's a big idea there that I think is really relevant for our audience as they're moving from high growth to high scale. And that's really around the customer experience. And you had that concept called Fanocracy, really turning customers into fans.
Yes.
And before we kind of dive into that topic, going deep, like, why is this a big idea? I mean, people talk about customer experience, but why does it matter that you create fans? This may seem intuitive, but I think it's good for our audience to have that context.
Well, it's interesting because business traditionally has been transactional. Business has been about selling products to people. And we in the business world have always tried to find new customers to replace the customers that either leave, or if we're selling one-off like products, like, you're selling cars or whatever it might be, you've got to continually sell more of them. But the idea of building fans is a different way of doing business, because when you're building fans, you have repeat customers, people who come back to you again and again and again because they love what you do. You have people then who also will share the fact that they love what an organization is doing. And one of my favorite examples, and we wrote about it in the book, is an automobile insurance company. Now, here's the thing, Brendan. Do you love auto insurance?
No.
Nobody loves auto insurance. However, there's a company called Hagerty. They do insurance for classic cars, and they've built millions of fans because they provide all kinds of incredible value above and beyond just insuring classic cars. They help you to provide valuations of how much classic cars are worth. They have a YouTube channel with over 1 million followers. They have Hagerty's Drivers Club, where they have 650,000 members who interact in the Drivers Club. They go to hundreds of different classic auto shows and events around the country every year. They've not only become the largest classic car insurance company in the world, they just went public on the New York Stock Exchange, and they are doing great. So the idea of building fans can work even in a business that people hate, like car insurance.
Well, I think a lot of the principles that you see, even within like a B2C context, are now transferring over to B2B. And in the raving fans concept, I mean, HubSpot popularized the whole flywheel concept. But I think there's
and HubSpot themselves is a fabulous example. I mean, they've got millions of people who subscribe to their blog and their YouTube channels and are taking the courses on HubSpot Academy. They have many, many, many more fans than they have customers, and that can only serve them well in the future. They are a classic example of a company that builds fans. For example, I think we're both going to Inbound in the next, as we're recording this, it's in the next couple of months. We're both speaking. I'm doing a session there, as I have every year since Inbound started. And there's 25,000 people who've come to the in-person versions of Inbound. Many of them are not HubSpot customers. They're fans of HubSpot that want to be there for that annual event.
Well, let's dive in a little bit further. So I think we understand kind of why it's important, or the value it can create. And in your book, you really talk about the 3 components to that. And there's the human element, there's the AI element, and there's the passion component. So let's start when you talk about the human kind of role and responsibility within this context of Fanocracy. What do you mean by that, and what's the application?
Sure, of course. There's many more ideas in the book besides these 3, but these are the ones that I think we want to dig into in our short time together today. So making business personal is so important, because as I said earlier, the idea that business is simply transactional is fine if you're just selling product and that's all you're doing. But if you want to grow fans, if you want to create an organization that has customers that come back again and again and again and want to share with other people, the idea of building a human organization, one that has humans in it, that treats people with respect, that doesn't lie, that doesn't put people on hold when you call the 800 number, claiming that they have greater than expected call volume, which is total BS, or that don't respond when you send an email into customer support. That kind of organization is not being human. And that is a problem for all kinds of businesses. The difference between an organization that's human, treating customers with respect, being there when a customer needs you, is that those customers then begin to enjoy that interaction, and they actually become fans. And it works with a B2C company. It works with a B2B company. I mentioned Haggerty Insurance. They do have a B2C where I can buy insurance, but a lot of their business is done B2B through insurance agents. So it works both ways, whether you're selling to businesses or you're selling to consumers.
And I think the way you just described it is interesting, because oftentimes, or at least maybe it's my own bias, but when I hear turning customers into fans, naturally I think that's a CS function. So customer service, customer support, depending on what industry you're part of. But I think the way you're describing it is it's across the entire journey from, lead to prospect to customer. So really the human element
I think it
touches
is.
all phases.
Yeah, I think it really is. I think it encompasses every aspect of an organization. And what happens when you reach out to the customer services department? How do they send you a bill? Is it easy to pay the bill? If you want to go, recently a company that I do business with, I wanted to go from monthly billing to annual billing, and it was ridiculously difficult to make that transition. It's like, gosh, that should be a touch of a button, just because they have my credit card number, they know my account, they have everything they need to know. And I just wanted to not have to pay them every month, just pay them once a year. I didn't even need a discount. I just wanted to pay them once a year. It was super difficult to do and took like an hour of my time. I'm now fighting one of my healthcare providers for, something really simple. I went for an eye exam. I needed a referral from my primary care physician so that it was covered by insurance. I've spent 2 hours on the phone with people trying to deal with this. These organizations, the eye doctor, my primary care, and the health insurance, all three of them are failing on this idea of treating people as humans, because I'm simply a number to all of them.
Yeah. And that's, let's talk about the flip side of that, because we just described as a number. So there's the human element, but there's also the role that like technology can play to help orchestrate this process. So how do you find that balance? Or maybe it's not a tension, but I'd just be curious to hear how you think about technology and AI specifically within this concept.
Well, obviously, technology is super important and can be super valuable. I mean, here we are. We've been talking about HubSpot, and we're both involved in the HubSpot ecosystem, and they've managed to apply technology to marketing in a fabulous way. So technology is amazing, and AI can also be amazing. And I'll give you an example of an aspect of AI that I think is amazing. I happen to be both an investor and a customer of a company called Lately. And what Lately does is they allow customers like me to take long form text or video content. So, for example, a blog post or a chapter of a book or a video of a speech, for example, drop it into the Lately AI engine, and then it will produce multiple, it could be 10, it could be 20, it could be 30 short form social media posts. So in the case of, and I did it today when I wrote a blog post, I dropped the URL of my blog post into the Lately AI engine, and within just a few seconds, it created a dozen tweets for me. I just go in and edit them, make sure they're cool, push the button to then schedule them one per week for the next dozen weeks. That's amazing. That saves a crazy amount of time, number one, but it also creates tweets I never would have thought of from the long form. So there's great aspects of AI, but I also think AI can be dangerous. It can be dangerous because the AI algorithms are tuned to look for things that are already happening. So there can be biases that are brought into AI that can be biased against people who don't fit a norm. If you go into a stock photo site and you search for CEO, you get a lot of white older men with gray hair, and you don't get any young women or any Black women. I mean, it's just can be very, very biased because of the way things are tagged and the way the AI works. So the other thing is that I think that many of the social media algorithms, especially the Facebook algorithm, is dangerous for humanity and dangerous to society. I actually think the Facebook algorithm is among the most dangerous technologies ever invented. Let me repeat that. The Facebook algorithm is one of the most dangerous technologies ever invented because it's tuned to reward anger. Here's why. Because Facebook's AI engineers have understood that when people are angry, they tend to be on Facebook longer. And when they're on Facebook longer, Facebook can sell more ads against those eyeballs that are on there longer. And so for that reason, people get sucked into conspiracy theories. They get sucked into in this country, at least the United States, the red team versus the blue team. And this is very, very dangerous for society. The algorithms themselves are causing, I believe, many of the problems that we have in our political world. It's causing problems around people believing that vaccines are not effective versus other people who believe that vaccines are effective. And that kind of thing becomes really, really polarizing. So AI has some amazing benefits. I described one, but AI has some incredible dangers that I think we need to address as a society.
Yeah, that the algorithm. I mean, you're describing the whole confirmation bias concept of within the dangers of it. To your point, but
yeah, for people who are susceptible and who get sucked into that, I think that the Facebook algorithm is something that should be held accountable for the events of January 6th, for example. And you don't see Facebook on trial during the Senate and the House hearings.
Yeah, I think going back to. I think the role that AI plays, to your earlier point, it really becomes, what are those manual processes that we can automate that allow humans to actually focus on the things that only humans can do?
Absolutely right. You said that in a very, very succinct and powerful way. Yes.
Well, let's move into the last part. Kind of the bookends, I think, are around the human element. And so we talked about the role of kind of having a human approach as it relates to engaging with customers, regardless of where they're in the journey. We talked about how AI can actually help orchestrate some of that. But let's finish with the concept of passion. So how does passion play into this idea of turning customers into fans?
So passion is infectious. And this concept of passion was the most surprising thing that my daughter Reiko and I discovered when we digged into the research that we did around fandom. And our book, Fanocracy, was really the first time that someone had really dug in deep into the neuroscience aspects of fandom, why and how we become fans of a product or a service or an idea or a company or a person. And this idea of passion becomes really important to fandom. It becomes important to fandom for companies as well as individuals because we're drawn to people who are passionate about something. And it does relate, as you rightly said, back to the initial idea we discussed briefly about humanity. But, that's one reason why I've got these things over my shoulder, the things I'm passionate about, all live music, but especially the Grateful Dead, surfing, the Apollo lunar program. So I've got these things in my home studio here. And this idea of this passion has become so important for the organizations that deploy it in an interesting way. And I want to give you two quick examples. So the first example is a dentist. His name is Dr. John Marashi. He's based in Southern California. And I speak at the Tony Robbins Business Mastery events every 6 months or so. And I have done for 8 years now. And Dr. Marashi was at one of the Business Mastery events a couple of years ago. And he came up to me afterwards. He goes, David, I understand this idea of building fans, but I'm a dentist. What are you talking about building fans? People hate dentists. And I said, well, Dr. Marashi, what do you love to do? And he says, I love to skateboard. And I said, well, why don't you talk about skateboarding? And so he actually ran with this idea. And in his office, he now has skateboards on his walls, much like I've got things that I love in my studio here. He sometimes will skateboard from one examination room to another. On his website, he's got pictures of him skateboarding. He started an Instagram, and many of those images are related to dentistry, but many of them are related to skateboarding, him skateboarding and videos and photos. And he's now got, I think, I forget the exact number, something like 30,000 followers on Instagram. Wow. And he contacted me about a year later and said, David, putting this idea of skateboarding out there makes me stand out from the other 10,000 dentists in Southern California. And he grew his business by over 20% last year that he can tie directly to sharing his passion for skateboarding. So that was my first example. Second example is my daughter, Reiko, who I mentioned is an emergency room resident at Boston Medical Center. And she actually started her residency at the very beginning of the pandemic in June of 2020. And she describes going in to see patients, and she's covered head to toe in PPE, personal protective equipment. She's got a mask, several masks. In fact, she has a shield. She has something covering her head, her hair, and she's got surgical sort of gowns and gloves. She's basically looks like an alien coming in to help someone who's scared because they're in the emergency room. And she said, Daddy, the best thing that I did was I put the images of the things I love as part of what I was wearing. So sometimes she would wear her outer mask would be a Boston Bruins mask, or she would have an LGBTQ flag pin on her clothing. And sometimes the hospital she and others would wear sweatshirts over the top of their other gear of the sports teams that they love. And she said the difference in the patients, they would smile, and all of a sudden, the patient can relate to the passion that people have, that those doctors and nurses and other professionals have. And it was transformational in their healthcare, actually, because the people treating them were not robots, they were human beings. And I think all businesses can learn from that, and I look at people's LinkedIns frequently just to see what they're doing. And the vast majority of people's LinkedIn, this is where I'm a professional. I have only my professional life on LinkedIn. And here's my Facebook, and this is where I have fun, and I hang out with my college friends. I think that there should not be a demarcation. Show us on LinkedIn who you are as a person. That passion will come through and be infectious.
Yeah, I love that. I think there definitely is a demarcation, and it reminds me of one of the things that we talk about at our company. And when we have like our new, we don't call them employees, we call them our peers, but when we have a new our peer come on board, like the first thing we talk about is like, as we think about our culture and environment, if you were to distill down, it is passion. It's that you find RP so compelling that you invite others to experience it, because that's what happens. To your point about passion, is like it's infectious, and then you want others to experience that if you're enjoying it. So whether that's your peers to come to our company, or you're talking about on LinkedIn and it's attracting, companies to come work with us. So I really am a believer in passion. That's something that we talk about a lot within kind of the four walls at RP. So, well, hey, David, this has been great opportunity just to understand not only the importance of, turning customers into fans, but ultimately the application, the how to do it. So talking about how to be human, to leverage technology, and then to bring passion behind it to create that experience. So as we wrap up, David, what's a practical next step that our audience can take to either learn more or engage with you going forward?
Well, thanks for having me on, Brennan. I really appreciate it. If you're interested in more about Fanocracy, www.fanocracy.com has a ton of information there. On most of the social networks, I am DM Scott, DMSCOTT, and I look forward to you sharing your passion because it truly is infectious. So get out there and show us who you are, what you love in your personal life, not just who you are as a business person.
You are more than what you do. We are human beings, not human doers, as we like to say.
100%.
Well, David, thanks for stopping by, and I look forward to seeing you next month in Inbound.
My pleasure. Hoping to see you there.
All right, see ya.